It's Maddie with the Innocence topic, and today we're going to be talking about a man who was convicted, exonerated, and convicted again after working with the Innocence Project. This is about a very controversial case, the case of Steven Avery. In July of 1985, a woman named Penny Ann was sexually assaulted. When interviewed by police, Penny was given a photo lineup of 9 men. Of those men, she picked out Steven Avery. She reaffirmed the identification at trial, pointing out Avery. At that same trial, a forensic examiner also testified that a hair found on Avery's jacket microscopically matched one of Penny's. As we've discussed before, this is pretty much impossible to prove in absolute, and it's up to the opinion of the forensic examiner, whose testimony or conclusion may be clouded by confirmation bias. Despite Avery being able to present 16 alibi witnesses and argue the timeline was improbable at best, it was 1985 when he was convicted. Post-conviction, several appeals were lost over the course of 10 years before, in 1995, when DNA testing was granted and fingernail scrapings collected from Penny contained the DNA of an unknown person. Those tests also did not conclusively eliminate Avery, so a new trial was not granted. But in 2002, a branch of the Innocence Project in Wisconsin, the Wisconsin Innocence Project, got a court order for DNA testing of 13 hairs recovered from Penny, which was ran through NDIS and CODIS, which matched Gregory Allen, a convicted felon who looked a lot like Avery. At the time, Allen was already serving a 60-year sentence for a sexual assault that occurred after the attack on Penny. In 2003, Avery was released, and in 2005, as a result of this wrongful conviction, the Wisconsin Department of Justice adopted a new model for eyewitness identification to prevent a repeat of this event. Now on to Making a Murderer. Making a Murderer is a well-known Netflix documentary that follows multiple cases, but in particular, Steven Avery. The same year that Steven Avery helped change the eyewitness identification model, a woman named Teresa Hallback was murdered. To make this clear, I'm going to adopt this into 3 parts: the crime, Avery's side, and the broader opinion. Here is the timeline. October 31st, Teresa goes to Avery's auto salvage yard to photograph a minivan for sale. Teresa was a photographer for Auto Trader magazine. November 3rd, the Hallback family reported her missing and an investigation was launched. November 5th, Hallback's cousin found Teresa's car hidden under brush and vehicle parts in Avery's auto salvage yard. November 8th, Avery speaks to the news saying he fears authorities are trying to frame him for the murder of Teresa because he sued the county for $36 million for wrongful conviction. November 9th, Avery was arrested and based on previous crimes, excluding his wrongful conviction, burglaries to be specific, he was charged with possessing firearms as a felon, after 2 were found in his home during the search. November 15th, Avery was charged with first-degree intentional homicide and mutilating a corpse, and is held on a $500,000 bail. Moving into 2006, on February 14th, the lawsuit against Manatowoc County was settled for $400,000. February 15th, the Hallback family files suit for wrongful death against Avery. March 2nd, Avery's nephew Brendan Dassey, 16 at the time, charged in adult court for first-degree intentional homicide, mutilation of a corpse, and sexual assault. These charges were based off of a confession Dassey made to police. The Hallback soon added Dassey to the wrongful death suit. March 31st, Avery tells the press he thinks Dassey's confession was coerced because his nephew isn't very smart. Moving into 2007, in between that time, there was a lot of... Our justice system is slow, basically. On January 30th of 2007, a judge rules defense attorneys can say Avery was previously wrongfully convicted of rape and that there was an unsecured vial of blood found in the county courthouse. Between February and March, the trial was held, and Avery's final charges were murder, mutilating a corpse, and a felon in possession of a firearm. After 6 weeks and 22 hours of deliberation, Avery is convicted of murder and being a felon in possession of a firearm, acquitted on mutilation of a corpse. Here's some facts. Avery's blood was found in Hallback's vehicle found on his property. Teresa's bones were found in Avery's fire pit, the same fire pit that Avery admitted to having a fire in the night she disappeared. Her bones and clothes were found interwoven in steel belt tires in the fire pit. Avery's nephew, Brendan Dassey, told police he went to his uncle's house to deliver a letter and heard a woman screaming. Avery let Dassey into the trailer where he saw Teresa nude and chained to a bed. Dassey told police that Avery said he'd sexually assaulted Hallback multiple times and encouraged the boy to do the same, so Dassey did. Dassey said he and Avery murdered Halbach by stabbing and strangling her, then later shooting her deceased body. Avery, since conviction and to this day, claims the police framed him for murder because he sued the Manatowoc County for wrongful conviction, that they planted evidence and there were false confessions made. However, it's unrealistic that someone, a police officer moreover, was so upset Avery was suing the county that they had Halbach mentioned she was going to Avery's before she was killed, and transported her remains to Avery's auto salvage yard, that her corpse had been burned and transported to the fire pit, as all of her bones were accounted for in the fire pit, and because her bones and clothes were interwoven with the steel belt tires, they had to have been burned there at the fire pit. Above all, it's unreasonable to believe all the police, court officials, and people involved in the investigation all agreed to the conspiracy that killed an innocent woman in order to what? Get back at a guy suing them? The lawsuit still went ahead, even if he only made a fraction of what he was hoping from it. It's all based on presumed damages. Even if it is agreeable that he should have made more than $400,000 from sitting behind bars for 18 years for a crime he didn't commit, it doesn't make sense that they thought convicting Avery of a different crime would stop that suit, or teach him a lesson of sorts. In the end, it frankly doesn't make sense. It's the true crime version of NASA faked the moon landing. Too many people would have had to have been involved in order to pull it off, with the outcome we know now. Avery appealed for years and maintains his innocence to this day. The Innocence Project was semi-involved in his appeal, but they've since been exhausted. Now, I'm not saying this for you to fear the work of the Innocence Project because they were involved in Avery's appeals. There is no evidence that exonerates Avery. But the goal of the Innocence Project is to exhaust every avenue to try and prove innocence. In this case, it is unprovable. The appeals for Avery no longer fall under the criteria that is accepted by the Innocence Project or the Wisconsin Innocence Project. They did, however, help him get good attorneys. The point of this is to show that the Innocence Project, their goal isn't to just free as many people as they can. They pick these cases very specifically. They look for new evidence. They look for material to exonerate someone. It's improbable that Avery did not commit the crime. The Innocence Project did secure him a new chance at life once. Now they are unable to. Overall, the Innocence Project's work has proven time and time again to be worth it in the grand scheme of things. At this point in the justice system, Avery would have to prove definitive innocence, or at least a probability of innocence. The probability of innocence doesn't seem to exist here, so that's why he remains behind bars along with his nephew, Brendan Dassey.